Let's move on to H6, which is an update and discussion on outreach and enforcement strategies to address consumer solar complaints, which we will be taking the items out of order, discussing items A and C first. I would like to now turn this over to Dave Foote to lead the discussion and begin by providing an update on consumer protection government task force partnerships of the Department of Business Oversight, California Public Utilities Commission, and the CSLB.
Yes, thank you. If you look at page 247 of your packet, we have a summary, excuse me, of a meeting that we conducted in this building, in this room, on October the 30th. Present for that meeting were staff and a commissioner from the Department of Business Oversight, the Public Utility Commission, and we had two board members. Mary Tykert was able to attend the morning session, and Diana Love attended the afternoon section. So I really want to thank you for taking the time to participate in these meetings. Now, what we accomplished in the morning is it was a closed session where we talked about our specific strategies to address egregious and predatory contractors that are harming consumers. While we very much support any clean energy goals to install solar or retrofit windows, whatever the case may be, we want to make sure that those that are out negotiating these contractors are properly identified and playing by the rules. And the reason for the morning session was so that we could share information as to how we have identified those that are selling these loans. There was a real emphasis and focus on property assessed clean energy financing contracts, and that's where is otherwise known as PACE funding, where the loan or the funding is made by a PACE administrator, and that funding, that money goes directly to the contractor. In those situations, you have somebody that's negotiating that financial agreement that's regulated by the Department of Business Oversight. Often, that person is also negotiating the home improvement contract. And when they do that, they're regulated by our board, and they're required to be a home improvement salesperson. So we really need to share information on who's negotiating what's really a complex financial agreement that includes a contractual agreement to do home improvement work at somebody's front door. So I think that meeting was very successful. We also talked about our outreach efforts, and Rick Lopes was instrumental, our Chief of Public Affairs, in putting together a bulletin for consumers to explain how they can protect themselves when they're thinking about installing solar or doing other home improvement work on their home. It was targeted towards Central California consumers because there was a number of complaints received in Central Fresno, in the Fresno area generally, Fresno County, that related to low-income consumers that were taken advantage of by contractors. They entered into contracts, many believing they were going to have the work done for free, only to realize their property taxes would double or triple, and they couldn't afford it. So we wanted to work closely with the Public Utility Commission in getting that information out. I'm pleased to say that that was successful. You'll also see on our website that we have a link. It's called Solar Smart, and it includes very helpful information to the public on how to hire a contractor, the notice requirements that need to be in a contract. It's also helpful to contractors so that they comply with the law. So the morning session talked a lot about working together on enforcement actions, but also on educating the public. In the afternoon, we had the 5 PACE administrators present. And what was interesting about this meeting, we had the 5 PACE administrators, but we also had consumer victims and consumer victim attorneys. And the real theme for that afternoon session is that when you have PACE funding, it's different than your general contract. Because when you hire somebody to work on your house, you're generally going to know who you've contracted with, and you'll know who you're paying. But with some of these PACE loans, the consumer, it's done electronically. They're saying they didn't actually approve their electronic signature. The money's going directly to the contractor or to somebody, and they're not always identified. And that's very troubling. And the work is not always done. So the money could be made based allegedly on a false completion certificate. So that's what we were talking about in the afternoon. I asked a question during that meeting. I said to the PACE administrators, if we have a consumer complaint, are you willing to tell us who you paid the money to? Because this has become a real problem when the consumer doesn't know who the money went to, they only know they're paying the PACE administrator back. The answer at that meeting was that there was some type of a statute that prohibited that. And I just want to go on record this morning, and Jim Ruane's participating in this call. We had a call with one of the PACE administrators, our chief executive officer, who said upon further research, the PACE administrators can provide this information. So that's critical. They can't provide the bank account number, but they can provide the information as to who received the money, the contractor's license number, and how much they got, how much they received. And that's critical, because Mike Janeski is going to talk in just a moment about a regulation that the Public Utility Commission was proposing, because they want to make sure that the contractors identify, that the consumer knows who the money went to, who was their contractor. But also, I'm going to turn over to Misty Vickery at this time to talk a little bit about the Solar Task Force and the steps she's taken to create a subdivision to address on these bad contractors, many of whom are not licensed, that are out performing this work and harming consumers. So, Missy?
Thanks, Dave. Following the October 30th Joint Solar Task Force meeting, CSLB determined it was necessary to form a subcommittee of 4 investigators that would focus on handling complaints that involved PACE financing. Over the last 18 months, we've identified 239 complaints that had PACE financing components. These complaints have been grouped by licensees, and what we're doing is looking at who had the most complaints filed and assigning them to investigators so they can handle them as a bulk. What we know that is not acceptable that PACE administrators are paying contractors that are not licensed and salespersons who are not registered and are attached to a licensed contractor and are not attached to a licensed contractor and are selling financing products to unknowing homeowners. To make the matters worse, PACE administrators are paying the contractors directly before the work has been completed, and the PACE administrators are not forthcoming with who the payments are being made to. Can you imagine a situation where you have a loan with someone for work of improvement and the lender won't tell you who they paid? The project remains complete and the homeowners are just abandoned. That is the situation that these homeowners are in, and that is the situation that these investigators are facing. Given that, we're going to use this task force to change this business model, because this is an issue that is not only a concern to CSLB, but also to the Public Utilities Commission.
And so with that, Mike Janeski will talk a little bit about the Public Utility Commission and why they thought they needed to have a regulation and perhaps a $500 annual charge on contractors that are hooking up to the grid. And their concern was they needed this so that we can identify actually who the contractor is. But with the support of our Ledge Chair, Augie Beltran, I did send a letter to the PUC explaining that we believe we have the existing tools that we need. But Mike, take it from here.
Yeah, the summary on page 249 does summarize the PUC rulemaking that came out in October. And just as Dave said, they're concerned about consumer protection. Obviously, their end is on the interconnection process. So when the work is all done and the application to connect to the grid occurs, they claim to be receiving complaints about people who don't know who sold them the contract or don't know who installed it. Well, we did our own research. You know, as has been reflected in this discussion, most of our complainants know who sold them the system and who installed it. But in the case of PACE solicitations, it's not always clear to the homeowner who got paid or who installed it. And so we decided, the PUC rulemaking, while it does hone in on that issue, it was clear to us that we can use existing resources to kind of attack this problem rather than create a whole new registration process, which is what the rulemaking recommends. You can actually read it yourself, the link on page 249. It's about 15 pages, and it does propose a registration process that would identify everybody that's connected to the grid, including officers of corporations and employees and HIS people, which of course obviously CSLB already does register and license people. So we did issue this letter on page 250 in response, and it does just reiterate what we just stated, that we believe existing resources and our current partnerships and existing law can be used to enforce the requirements and really come down on these transactions rather than create a duplicate registration process, which it's not clear would actually resolve the problem. If somebody is selling solar through somebody that they've not identified through their public records, there's no reason to think that they would do the same on the interconnection end. So we think we can use our existing process to resolve the problem. The decision on the rulemaking is anticipated from PUC in January.
And to take it a step further, we work very closely with our partners from the solar industry. I know we have some here today, appreciate that, and also the electrical industry, to look at clarifying when a salesperson has to be a registered salesperson, when are they a contractor. So in working with our partners, but also working with the Public Utility Commission and the Office of the Attorney General, we developed a lead generation and solar broker advisory bulletin. So this is just intended to be advisory to the industry so that they don't get themselves in trouble. You know, we're seeing situations where people are going out knocking on doors and they may be registered themselves, but they're not tied to a contractor or they're not registered at all. And if they're telling that potential customer, that homeowner, that they have the ability to install a work of improvement on their home, they're going to be considered a contractor. Or if they're working for a contractor, they have to clearly identify themselves as a registered salesperson. So that's really what this lead generation bulletin is for. It's something I know the Public Utility Commission is very excited about. And I hope it brings some clarity for the industry and for the Solar Association who's here today. Thank you for your help with it. Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
That about covers it. I think just the basic distinction here, there's lead generation and there's solar brokers. I think to help contextualize it all, as far as we can tell, lead generation involves selling names and information of people who might be interested in solar to companies who might be able to install that solar. And then there's solar brokering, which involves individuals who are selling contracts for solar and selling it to contractors who are able to install. So this this advisory breaks down when a home improvement salesperson registration is required for those transactions. It just restates existing law as it applies to these new marketing models.
Is there a state agency that regulates PACE? Is that the PUC?
No, yeah, it's actually the Department of Business Oversight has direct authority over them. So it used to be the Department of Corporation, now it's DBO, and they regulate PACE. They regulate the 5 PACE administrators.
Yeah, I know we have this solar task force group or whatever. One thing we should look into, when my neighbor got, like I told you, the independent contractors or whatever you want to call them, doing their thing, so I go and investigate, see, man, what can I do? So I go to PG&E, because he said it was through PG&E, so I go to PG&E and I go to their solar site and I click on it, and it takes me to a thing, type in your zip code and whatever, and then it takes me to a government website with all the solar contractors. Okay, and then that one, it has a name and all the other stuff, and so you click on that particular contractor's name, and well, then it shows if they have employees, that they don't, but it also has a CSLB number, so I click on that, and a lot of them that didn't have employees, so of course I click on the CSLB website, and it goes, okay, they don't have work, they claim exempt on workers' comp, but then again, they're back to doing it for PG&E or whomever up and down the state. But also they've been, the ones I've clicked on didn't have workers' comp, were expired licenses, all this other stuff. So the government website itself isn't even updated on who can do this work. The one was expired in 2015. Why are they in 2019 on a site through the government that says they can do solar panel? So, this stuff like that you think somebody would update this stuff.
Well, that's absolutely something we're going to look at. And one other thing we discovered from the meeting on October 30th is that the public utilities are required to have on file a contract that permits them to hook up to their grid. And so we need to do a random sampling of that. And what we've emphasized is that they need to be ensuring that those contractors are licensed. And we also need to do a comparison to these loan brokers that are regulated by DBO with our HISs. I know that's something that's being looked at right now. There's a lot of duplicate names, but it's that type of thing, mining that data to ensure the contractors are licensed, and we will look into that website. Thank you, David.
Okay, do we have any members have any questions or comments on the Government Task Force or CSLB Solar Task Force? Seeing none, do we have any public comments on Government Task Force or CSLB Task Force?
Richard Marks, and I would really like to compliment David and his staff to the point that Mr. Diaz made about the what I would call kind of a complicit behavior by both the IOUs and the municipal utilities that are looking to shed their responsibility to provide electricity and other services. We're seeing a kind of a pattern. The Los Angeles Times has covered some of the relationships between these companies and the utilities, and it is definitely beneficial for the CSLB to be taking the action that they are with these things to research who are the responsible parties and make sure that the utilities are acting appropriately, and we thank him for that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brad Hebner of the California Solar and Storage Association. I just wanted to say that we strongly support and appreciate the work that the Contractors Board is doing on this issue. Yeah, like any industry, there are clearly some bad actors out there, and we obviously fully support the contractor laws related to this issue, and they need to be enforced. We agree that the proposal from the Public Utilities Commission would be duplicative of what you already do and would not be helpful. We actually would like it if the Contractors Board were able to step up their efforts and do more on enforcing against misrepresentation and unprofessional behavior and issuing penalties and sanctions. I like to think that those playing loose with the rules are not members of the association. I can't promise that's 100% true, but it's certainly largely true. It's hard to say whether they're just out there thinking they're not breaking laws or if they're flagrant violators. But one way or another, we need to find them, educate them, and enforce the law. So again, appreciate and support your work, and look forward to working with you. I hope you can do everything possible to enforce these laws.
So, and I apologize if I'm catching up slowly here. So basically, the PACE representative goes in, does the deal with the homeowner, and then subs it out to a contractor, licensed or unlicensed?
Oftentimes, the person that's negotiating that loan is working for not only the PACE administrator, but also the licensed contractor. So they're doing both at the same time.
Gotcha. And so this contractor, licensed or otherwise, where does he or she enter a contract with the homeowner or PACE?
Well, that's where it gets a little bit dicey, because what we're seeing is they're entering into a financial agreement, sometimes with the same contract. So you have a contract where it's being financed through a PACE lender, but a contractor's installing it. You as a homeowner aren't quite sure what's happening, but it's for a solar system. It's the same person that's negotiating it. The consumers will tell you that they didn't sign anything. It's being done electronically. So the agreements are generally one and the same. That's where it gets really confusing. Sometimes they'll think they're dealing, I know we have Becky Leiker, our analyst, who's been really mining this data, but a lot of times they think they're dealing with the PACE administrator to install their solar system, not realizing that there actually is a contractor that's receiving the money. And the reason why we're so concerned about it, especially when you look at the Fresno County cases, where consumers don't have a solar system or a working system,
Right.
And yet they have to pay this money back. And if it's PACE financed, then they have the ability to put a priority lien on it. It's a super lien, if you will. So
I can't help but think that through the license law, through 7031 and through the home improvement contract requirements, that there's an opportunity to get to that particular contractor, either treating PACE as a contractor for doing that work, unlicensed, and or putting the onus on that solar installer, that they're in fact contracting with a unlicensed entity that's purporting to offer.
you are exactly right. And that's something we're working with the victim attorneys on. I want to just really a shout out to Public Utility Commissioner Martha Guzman-Aceves for her leadership in looking at that angle and going out and to helping these consumers get out of these loans. And exactly, using 7031, it's a very valuable tool.
In this case.
In this case, yes.
I thought I'd clarify, the law does require that that pay solicitors and pay solicitors agents must either be licensed contractors or registered HIS people unless they're exempt from our laws, which that will almost never happen. If you're selling, you're going to require either the registration or the salesperson or the license. A lot of the Parlier cases and the Fresno cases, those occurred before a number of the new PACE laws came out in the last couple of years to amend the Streets and Highways Code and the Financial Code. So in theory, ideally, those situations that occurred in those communities would not occur today under the new legislation.
As this is information item only, no proposed action is required from the board at this time. Do any other board members have any questions or comments on these items? Is there any other public comment on these items? Seeing none.